Well, forgotten for decades, the stories of Chinese ANZACs are now becoming part of the broader Australian wartime narrative. In the last few years, the descendants of Chinese Australian soldiers have made an effort to share stories of their heroism, educating the wider community about their contribution. Sean Mantesso explains.
As ANZACs and their descendants gathered for today's Remembrance March in Melbourne, the little-known story of Australia's Chinese war veterans was also being celebrated. Wellington Lee, 93, is a fourth-generation Chinese-Australian veteran of World War II and the Korean War, as well as a former Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. He's been in hospital recovering from surgery, but still made it out with his grandson for today's march.
Look, I'm very proud, considering all that he's done throughout his time, both during the war, but since then, couldn't be prouder. When
Mr. Lee went to enlist, there were still race requirements for entering the armed services. But many Chinese Australians managed to skirt the rules and enlist anyway.
And one of the good things was, but also a bad thing, we were never recognised. It was good in that we weren't just Australian citizens in the military. We weren't Chinese. The bad thing was they tended to ignore us really notable Chinese military.
Although at least 19 Chinese Australians received bravery awards in World War I, their heroism was not always fully recognised. A notable example of this is legendary sniper Billy Singh. He served at Gallipoli and later in France, and he's reported to have shot more than 200 enemy soldiers. He received a Distinguished Conduct Medal for his service, but Mr. Lee says his Chinese heritage stopped him from obtaining the highest military honours.
No, he should have got the Victoria Cross, and no doubt about it, even 2 Victoria Crosses. And yet they got the lowly British Empire medal, which I usually give to someone they don't want to give a medal to. And he died a pauper. If you ask the average Australian who's Billy Singh, they wouldn't know.
At least 213 Chinese Australians enlisted in World War I, and potentially many more in World War II, but the exact number is unknown. Mark Wang, the Deputy Chairman of the Museum of Chinese History in Melbourne, says war brought a temporary respite from racism in Australia.
When they were on the front, they were all working together as mates fighting the enemy, so there was no discrimination at all when they were soldiers.
But once home, the story was often very different.
You know, they went back to the White Australia policy and the discrimination in the homeland was much greater, but not on the war front.
Times have changed, and efforts are underway to get recognition for the service of Chinese Australian ANZACs. The Chinese Museum has held an exhibition at RSL branches across regional Victoria, and it will soon travel to Perth. A sign remaining Chinese ANZACs and their descendants will continue to challenge the stewards of history to ensure their story is one that's not forgotten. Sean Mantesso, ABC News.
Netflix, Amazon and other streaming services will continue to be free to submit their